Let's take a quick look at our agenda today for the webinar. We're going to go through a quick overview of the Vantagepoint Intelligence. We're going to take a closer look at the cube. We're going to look at some illustrations and visualizations, and we're going to talk about why Vantagepoint Intelligence. We're going to look at some good to knows, and then we're going to do a little Q&A at the end. So let's jump right in for the Vantagepoint Intelligence overview. So here's a little illustration of a sort of a schematic design. Well, not really a schematic, I guess it's more of an illustration. High-level overview of Vantagepoint Intelligence components. You can see that there's two ways that you can connect data to Vantagepoint Intelligence. One is straight from your SQL database. That's with an ODBC connection from the transaction system, connecting live to your Vantagepoint data. The other way is with an analysis cube, which comes with the Vantagepoint Intelligence add-on module for Vantagepoint. And that's really what we're going to talk a lot about today. That's where all the power is. So from your data, you're going to connect with the intelligence tool, and Vantagepoint Intelligence uses the BI tool of Tableau for manipulating the data, creating graphs, reports, analysis, all that stuff, all the good stuff. And from Tableau, you will then publish visualizations over to Vantagepoint as dash parts in your dashboards, and those will be embedded right in Vantagepoint. A quick look at the application stack for Vantagepoint Intelligence. This layer of disks here is representative of the transactional data layer, which is, as we mentioned before, the actual live data behind Vantagepoint. So Vantagepoint Intelligence provides a data warehouse which sits alongside of your transaction data, and the data warehouse rolls up a lot of the data to support faster and better analysis. And it's not going to, when you're doing this analysis with BI tools, it won't be hitting against the transaction data directly. So you can experiment a little bit more without worrying about impacting your transaction data. From the data warehouse, there's some logic that Deltek has written that rolls all this data up into a cube. And a cube is really a dimensional way of storing data for faster analysis. All of the linkages to data across different tables have, they're reorganized in a way that the data is already linked together. So you're not going to have to write a lot of code to link separate tables like the project table and accounting tables. All of that stuff sort of is already coming together for you from the data warehouse with the cube. And then on top of the analysis layer, you have the presentation layer. And there are a few different options from the presentation layer for how you can publish your presentations out, your visualizations. Of course, the first way would be a dashboard right in Vantagepoint. Push those right up to Vantagepoint. That's a good way to do it. Keep everything in one spot. One of the nice things about the cube is that you can actually connect to it directly with Excel too. So that is another way. You may, if you're very familiar with Excel, you may get started with some visualizations that way. You could probably also post them to your intranet, and other folks could look at what you've done in Excel there against the cube too. If you're using Vantagepoint on-prem, you could also publish these visualizations to a regular web browser on your intranet, or out to some mobile portals that you may have. So that's just a quick look at the stack. Let's take a closer look at the cube, because that's really where the power is behind Vantagepoint Intelligence. So again, with the cube, it all starts with the data warehouse, which is like a separate copy of your data sitting alongside your transaction system. The cube is populated on recurring refresh schedule from the data warehouse, and your Vantagepoint administrator will have some options for how often the data warehouse and the cube are going to refresh. I think by default it's daily, and I think for cloud customers, Deltek has a nightly schedule every 24 hours for that. And if you're on-prem, you could experiment with updating that more often than daily if you wanted to, maybe at noontime, or however often you want to refresh that. You may want to experiment with it. It probably does take some time. So, the standard is usually to refresh that overnight. And so a lot of the times, your analysis cube would be one day behind your transaction data. So there's some key components of a cube, and they're really critical to understanding and working with cube data. You have dimensions, which can be names, dates, text fields. You have measures, which are numeric or qualitative data. You have your KPIs and your key performance metrics, and you can set some goals based on those key performance metrics. You can make calculated measures, and you can work with user-defined fields. Getting a little bit more into the weeds on the analysis cubes here. As I mentioned before, it's critical to understand these four primary components. Your measures, also referred to as facts, are your numeric values. Dimensions provide more context for the measures. That would be like dates, for example. So let's say revenue is a measure, is a fact, is a number, and then a date would be a dimension that would go with revenue, so that you can look at revenue over year, month, quarter, week, whatever data analysis you might want to do there. Hierarchies are really important to understand when using cube data and business intelligence tools. This is what will support your drill down within a dimension. And so one of the examples of a hierarchy would be, your dates again. So year would be at the top of the hierarchy, and then you could drill down to quarter, month, week, day within that. And members would be the fourth really key component of the cube to understand and to look into. And this is the data, the items and the data that are in your dimension. So for example, project type is a dimension, and a member of project type may include, your project types like construction or aviation, engineering, education, environmental. Now, however you classify your projects, those values for project type are considered the members. So that's a little background and getting a little bit in the weeds in the cube there. Let's look at some fun stuff now. So this is a good illustration, that just helps you visualize what is the idea of cube data. So this cube shows the revenue over time. The bubble out identifies the 2019 revenue from the religious market for the Chicago office, and this is where they intersect, right? Now, this is just an illustration to help understand the concept of cube data. It's probably not a product that you would try to publish out of a business intelligence tool, but you can see the way this data comes together. It is like a cube, right? You have multiple dimensions here, whereas in a traditional graph, you would just have X and Y. With cube data, it's multi-dimensional. So you have revenue by market, by year, by office. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and it builds up a cube. And you can identify any intersections of this data that you want to work with. You can filter it for the 2019 revenue from the religious market for the Chicago office. You could target other offices, or you could target other revenue values, other time values, that sort of. Here's another example of the cube that shows the 2020 revenue for the Boston office across all of the markets. So, we're looking at time, which is 2020 in this case. The markets here: retail, corporate, religious, and healthcare, and the offices on this axis here, and rolling it up for all of the revenue in 2020 across all markets. And of course, you could break that down to different markets, different years, different offices. Just a little couple illustrations on the cube to get the juices flowing. So back to Vantagepoint, you can manage your cube in Vantagepoint. And this is a screenshot from the Analysis Cubes interface within Vantagepoint. Measures and dimensions. So there's two cubes that come with Vantagepoint Intelligence. One is a project cube and the other one is general ledger. So here we'd be looking at a list of all of the measures for the project cube. And you can go through these and select which ones you want to keep in your project cube and which ones you may not need, you're not going to use. And you can turn them on, turn them off. One of the reasons that you turn them on and turn them off is just the speed of how fast your cube is going to refresh. So if you don't want some of this data in your cube taking an extra few minutes or more to refresh, then you can just take them off. It'll also limit the list of measures that you have to work with and search through and look through when you're making your visualizations. So, pick these items for whatever is going to work best for you. You can pick your dimensions, you can pick your measures for both cubes, save that, and that'll be the definition of your cube nightly refresh. You can also manage your KPIs, calculated measures, and currency exchange from this screen in Vantagepoint as well. I wanted to take a closer look at how to work with the KPIs in Vantagepoint. So Vantagepoint Intelligence comes with many standard KPIs that are provided right out of the box. Some of these may work very well for you, and you may want to create your own as well. It's great to have some to get started with, though. So here are some of the standard ones that come with Vantagepoint Intelligence out of the box. One that I was looking at here when I took the screenshot was the contract backlog target. It's a standard Vantagepoint Intelligence KPI. And what I was doing with that is I was assigning a specific goal to that KPI. So that's the way the KPIs and the goals work. You'll select a KPI up here, and then down below, you'll add a new goal, define your parameters and your values for the goal, and then it'll be assigned to this KPI up here, so that when you're working with Vantagepoint Intelligence doing your analysis, you can work with these KPIs and these goals as you define them here in Vantagepoint. Now, when we make new goals and new KPIs here in Vantagepoint, we save them. They won't be available until the next time the cube refreshes. So just a good thing to keep in mind. If you save them now and then you go to look for them with the analysis tools or Tableau or Excel, they wouldn't be there until the next cube refresh. So that said, let's jump in and look at some examples of some visualizations published to Vantagepoint from Tableau. So this is a screenshot of Tableau, the Deltek Vantagepoint Intelligence tool. Tableau is a very industry standard business intelligence tool. It's been around for quite a long time. I would say it was probably one of the first and biggest players in the BI space. It has quite a few competitors now, but it's really one of the originals. So you can see here in Tableau, we're connected to the project cube. We have our dimensions and our measures. This is like the menu over here of the stuff that we just looked at before. And you know, the idea from the cube is that all this stuff is put together for you. You don't have to write any queries. You don't have to write any code. This is really a desktop analysis tool where you can start to work with this stuff and not have to worry about all that heavy lifting behind the scenes, because it's already been done with the data warehouse and the cubes that have been put together with the Vantagepoint Intelligence module already. And so here we have an example, and what you do, and this is just a screenshot, so I can't really make it move, but what you do is you can search up here for net revenue. It appears in the list, and you just grab it and drag it over to the columns. Search for project type, grab it here, drag it over to the rows, and then you very quickly have a graph of net revenue by project type. Now, there's also been some other pretty nice stuff that's applied to this graph as well. We have it color-coded by project number, and that would be the legend that appears over here. It gets a little busy in this case. There's even several different versions of pink, which might make it a little bit hard to determine which pink we are looking at, but you can mouse over. And in the screenshot here, we're mousing over the National City Bank building project in the demo database, office building project. And then, so over here, you can see project number, and I think this is project name. And these have been pulled into the markup section of Tableau. And so, you know, tooltips is one. We've applied tooltips to the project information here. And that's, so by applying tooltips here, when you mouse over, you get this tooltip of all of this information about the project here. And then project number was the color coding for the legend was applied by project number. And that's what generates this list over here. There's also a filter that can be applied here too for project type. So you can also, I mean, this list is very busy right now, but you can filter it by project type because we've defined a filter here. And, you know, that's probably how you would publish some of these things, you would take this and apply a filter for project type. Maybe you would apply a construction project type filter, and that would make this a whole lot less busy. This is just the base that you would work from to provide this net revenue by project type, and then apply more filters to make it a whole lot less busy. All right. So that's a quick look into Tableau. And then the idea is that once you have these graphs and analysis the way that you like them, you really just save this file, and then you go back to Vantagepoint, very similar to the Vantagepoint screens that we looked at before. And there's an import button, and you import this file up to Vantagepoint, and then it'll be listed along with your other Vantagepoint Intelligence items, and it'll be available to dash parts and dashboards, and then you can integrate it with Vantagepoint that way, the same way that you would build other dashboards and dash parts in Vantagepoint. Just add these in as options. And so this is an example of the Tableau visualizations brought up into Vantagepoint as dash parts in a dashboard. This is the example of an executive dashboard. And you can put multiple graphs. You know, each one of these is its own dash part from Tableau, laid out in a dashboard in Vantagepoint. So now that we've taken a look at all of the overviews and core components of Vantagepoint Intelligence, let's talk a little bit about why Vantagepoint Intelligence. As with most BI tools, you're going to gain insight into your business to drive better decision making, and it's really the idea of why people want more power from their data. They want to get at the data that's behind the black box to do more analysis, establish clear goals, gain greater insight with historical data and predictive analysis. You know, the historical analysis comes pretty easy because you know, take the revenue, project revenue, for example. All you have to do is apply the date dimension to that, and now you're looking at net revenue by project over whatever date range you want to give it. You can go back 6 months, you could go back 6 years. Predictive analysis requires a little bit more thought and planning. You know, you would only be looking to do predictive analysis on data that is predictable, which means that it has historical patterns that are going to be used to show what that pattern may look like in the future. And you can also apply different parameters to that to sort of model the future a little bit differently. You know, maybe if you were modeling net revenue over project type, you know, of course, that has the history and pattern, so therefore you could model it to the future. And maybe you want to take away some of the project types. What would happen if we lost all of our construction projects? And you could model how that would look in the future if you took construction out of net revenue moving into the future. It probably maybe wouldn't look good for a lot of people. You can determine which areas are thriving and which areas are at risk in your business. And you can do this with timely information. You can do it with, you know, interactive drill down parameters, different looks at the data. So it's really the next step from some of the flat file reports that you may traditionally get out of your transaction system. You know, make the right decisions, do it quickly, deliver the right information to the right people at the right time. A little bit more on historical and predictive analysis. We talked some about this already, and here's a little bit of a visualization there, and it's kind of a little bit grainy, so I can kind of see it. But this graph here is spent, billed, received AR and revenue over the last 8 years. Can't read what the color coding is there, but I guess I could imagine what it might be. We have the OH rate by org. We have opportunity staging weighted by revenue by org. We have the last 10 months profit percent by project manager. So that would be a good example of historical analysis there. You know, this really just helps you expand the lens, helps you stop running dozens of reports and trying to pull them all together. That is, you know, that is one common thing that I've heard over the past few months in working with some of you out there, is that one of the reasons we want to get our hands on business intelligence is because we don't want to pull these 3 reports together anymore to make one. You know, and so that really brings a level of automation to the table too, right? We're not gonna have to pull these 3 reports together and spend a bunch of time doing this. We're gonna have a nice live report graph visualization that's already pulled those 3 data sets together. We don't have to do it monthly, and it's in more real time. We don't have to wait for next month to pull them together again. We can look at this every day. Those 3 data sets are going to be pulled together. And we can look at different historical views and forecasts in one view, right alongside other supporting graphs and visualizations too. So you're not just always looking at one thing. You'll have you know, a couple different views that are very related right next to each other. You can filter them. You can drill down. You can get a lot more hands-on with the data. And a lot of the work of putting that stuff together is already automated for you. Real-time scrutiny, we were talking about that a little bit before, you know, so you're not going to have to wait for that monthly process to pull 3 or 4 or more reports together. It's already going to be pulled together. You can look at it on a daily basis. You know, by default, it may be a day behind because of the data warehouse extraction. So I guess real time is a little bit subjective. I guess it, you know, maybe we'd use a different term here. You know, if somebody entered some data in the system 5 minutes ago, or even 20 seconds ago, I guess I wouldn't expect it to show up available to my BI in that level of real time. But it'll definitely be available to my BI tool set as of the last analysis cubes refresh, which should be within the last 24 hours at the very latest. And that's a lot more real time in context than our flat reports or our manual reporting process that pulls multiple reports and data sets together. You know, you can easily view the data that matters the most. We're not going to get lost in data that's not really relevant. We don't have to be as much of a detective to sort through large data sets that contain a lot of extra and irrelevant data. You know, this allows us to make more informed changes instead of after the fact decisions. And the dashboards are interactive. You can monitor these KPIs that we looked at before. And it's nice because you can set those KPIs and those goals based on what's important to you in your business. And make those critical decisions before it's too late. A little bit more on smarter, faster decisions. going to take us a lot less time to review the data and find those correlating patterns. This is an illustration here of looks like employee utilization and realization. That's one that I hear a lot about too, and working with folks that are out there today. You know, to get a better view on employee utilization. You know, I know we have some reports and Vision and Vantagepoint that have done this and provided pretty solid information on it. But I think this really brings the visual aspect of it to life, as well as interactive and drill down. I think you have an employee list over here. You know, we can filter by employee. We can look at groups of employees. We can look at individual employees. And then we can start to drill through the graphs and see what's behind the graph. And you also have utilization and realization side by side, by year, by employee, and by the utilization ratio, I believe, is on this axis over here. And so, you know, these are much more interactive, a lot less stagnant, really puts the data at your fingertips and allows you to analyze that data from across the business and not just one area. We can do role-appropriate views with the Vantagepoint Intelligence. So this illustration here is an example of, I would call it an executive dashboard. You know, we've built our BI visualizations that the executive team wants to see. In this case, it looks like we've got at least 4 or 5 of them going on here. We've got revenue analysis, we've got cash receipts by division, gross margin by project type. So this is the dashboard that the executive team has communicated to you as the BI person that they would like to see in one view. You know, when they log into Vantagepoint, this could be either their default screen or it's, you know, one click away. They can leave this up all day. They can look at it in the morning. All the stuff that they want is right here. You know, they've probably spent a little time designing this with you, and then you went back and made it work for them. And they can interact with it. They can filter it. They can drill through all that good stuff. Empower the leaders with the data. Share the goals and the metrics that are important, because we've defined those KPIs. We've defined those goals. And we're going to deliver more business intelligence without sacrificing control. All right, so that just brings us into a few good to knows, and then we'll take some questions. I think one thing that's definitely good to know is that you can access the cube with Excel. So, you know, if you've never used Tableau before, it takes a little getting used to. There's a little curve there, but you could get started with the cube right from Excel. Microsoft Excel takes an analysis cube connection as a data source, and you're off and running. You can do a little data mining. You can start working with that data from the cube, which so much work has gone into to roll that stuff up for you. Don't have to write any code. Another thing that's good to know is the Vantagepoint Intelligence Cube is very well documented with a data dictionary. And I have an example of that right here. I just wanted to show, because I think this is very important. This is available on the customer portal. So Project Data Cube dimensions. This is going to list every single dimension in the Project Data Cube with a nice description about what actually is this stuff. And it's sorted by, I guess, alphabetical order here. So for both the project and the general ledger cube, all of the dimensions, measures, all of that stuff is very well documented. So this will really help you figure out what you're going after for analysis. And if you're wondering what some of this stuff is, what are these dimensions, you can look them up and get a really good idea. So that's good to know. The SQL Direct Connect is great for data mining in the transaction data. We didn't really talk too much about the SQL Direct Connect. I touched on it at the beginning, but you can connect Tableau, or even Excel for that matter, directly to your transaction data, and you can do some data mining that way. There's pros and cons, I would say, to connecting to your transaction data, but in a lot of cases, I use the word data mining because I think that's really what you're trying to do when you go against a transaction data. Is you're going to dig in there until you find those nuggets. You're going to, you're mining for minerals in there. When you're in that transaction data, there's a lot of linkages, and if you know how to join the tables together, it can be even more powerful. You may have to write a little code, or you may have some tools that can define the linkages. Some of the Microsoft tools will allow you to define linkages on keys or common IDs, WBS1, that sort of thing. I mean, you can start linking directly together with the transaction data. One thing to remember there, though, is that you are working behind Vantagepoint when you do that. So if you go and write a huge query that you're just experimenting with against the transaction data, you may slow down Vantagepoint for your end users. So you got to be a little bit careful there when you're doing that. But one example that I do have is I was working with a client. We got Tableau set up. We wanted to set up ODBC and the cube from Tableau. We set up the ODBC connection, and they were very quickly able to service a request for data from Tableau with the ODBC, because I think it was the accounting department had some questions about expense data, and they weren't really finding a great way to work with the expense data with the tools that they had. Tableau connected to the transaction system over SQL, and they just pulled in the expense table into Tableau, started filtering it, applying some parameters, and they were able to service that request directly against the expense table. And that's a good way to do it. If you're looking for some data mining in one table, there's not a lot of linkages there. And in this case, Tableau provided them a window, provided them access straight to that table that they may not have had before. You can also do the same thing with Excel Direct Connect too. The Vantagepoint Cloud SQL Direct Connect, the ODBC connection that we were just talking about. If you're a cloud client of Vantagepoint, you're not going to be able to publish these SQL Direct Connect visualizations back to Vantagepoint. You're going to be able to just work with that SQL Direct Connect data on the Tableau desktop only. And that's because of the network security topology of Vantagepoint being in the cloud. For security reasons, you can pull your data down to the desktop, but with the SQL Direct Connect, we're not going to be able to publish that back to Vantagepoint necessarily. So just a little bit of a good to know there before we get diving in too much. That a couple different good to knows there. And so also related to that, we just highlighted down here that you can publish your visualizations if you're cloud or on-prem, publish them right to Vantagepoint, no problem. Cloud or on-prem, you can use Excel, and connect to the cube and publish that stuff, no problem. If you want to use your own browser URLs or your publish Tableau visualizations to places on your intranet using Vantagepoint data, but not publish it in Vantagepoint, you can only do that if you're on-prem. You can't get the intranet links from the cloud. And publishing visualizations out to mobile platform only works for on-prem. Again, the network security topology there. Yeah.
Jesse, one of the questions we got a few times is asking for clarification. So you can export the Tableau files directly to Excel?
Not exactly. You connect Excel to the cube data. So Tableau and Excel don't work together, but Excel can connect to the cube and you can work with the cube data from Excel. Does that make sense?
I think so.
But Liz, I guess I've talked for 40 minutes now, and that's a good segue. It brings us to the question section of today's webinar.
Yes. So I don't think we're going to have enough time to get to all of them, but what was that?
Yeah, I thought I saw some.
Yes. Another question that we got is it possible to pass the username from Vantagepoint to Tableau dash parts as a parameter value to use in filters?
Username as a parameter. That one, I would say table that one, and if anybody wants to follow up with me directly on that, we could chat about it a little bit more.
Okay. And I think that's all we have time for right now. Just any other questions? There are a lot in here. We will get back to everyone with some answers. We appreciate everyone's time. I just want to thank everyone for joining. Jesse, thank you so much for presenting for us. Again, everyone, if you would like to receive a copy of today's recording, please feel free to reach out to me, Liz Sidney. My contact information is in the chat feature for reference, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Jesse and our Aktion team will be in touch and following up, especially on those questions that have not been answered. And also, just so you know, at the end of the webinar session, there's going to be a survey pop up in your browser. Please fill that out. Your feedback is very important to us. Again, if anyone has any immediate questions, please contact me, Jesse, Hillary, and thank you everyone for your time and for joining us today.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.